Brian, I have one more question for you. USC and Notre Dame fans, I think we would both agree that if the college football playoff does remain at 4 teams, hey, no problem. USC and Notre Dame expect to be in the top 4. That's our standard. We don't settle for less. Bring it on if that's what it is. But in private, do you think that Lincoln Riley and Marcus Freeman would secretly think, you know what, we could really use expansion to 8 for a number of reasons? One, we get some playoff wins on the board. We're not playing Alabama in our first playoff game. We're playing a mid-level seed. We can get momentum, but also, we're just winning playoff games. We're getting into the national conversation a little bit more. We can kind of change the conversation surrounding our programs. Now, with Lincoln Riley and USC, it's not so much USC because USC hasn't been in the playoff, but Lincoln Riley, he's 0-3 in the playoff. It's he's hit his head on the ceiling the way Brian Kelly did at Notre Dame. Do you think that a playoff expansion would serve the interests of these coaches, even though, again, they would always say in public, we're fine with 4 because we expect to be top 4? How would you tackle that particular question?
I see what you're saying, and I think there's a lot of merit to that. I was initially against the 12-team expansion, and then one of my co-hosts kind of explained to me, hey, he made some great points. I came around, and Mark knows I don't admit that I'm wrong very often, but in that instance, I was wrong because I was looking at it from a very narrow standpoint, and the point was look, you get into the playoff, you get some confidence, you get that W. Maybe an Alabama gets knocked off, or maybe the seeding works out where you're 5 and then you play 4 and you don't play Alabama till you've won 2 games, right? So, because the way in that format, Notre Dame could never be higher than a 5 seed, the way that was going to work. So, I think it worked kind of out that way. And so I think there's something to that. I also think that's kind of partly why, I've had a proposal that's a different thing. It's not expansion of the playoff, but it's changing the format of the postseason, where you get rid of the playoff until you don't decide your 4 until after the bowls, and then go back to the way the bowls used to be, and then pick your 4. And then I think that creates more things, because I still like the idea of being able to end your season with a win. And an expanded playoff means 11 teams are guaranteed to end their seasons with a loss. And I think that can kind of then stifle, if you go out and win a playoff game, right? Let's say you go out and you beat Central Florida or Baylor. Because let's be honest, if you're getting a first round playoff win, that's who you're beating. You're not beating an 11 seed Bama. You're beating Penn State or a 3-loss USC team from 2016. Although I think that team would have done some damage. You're that's who you're beating. If you beat Baylor or Oklahoma State or Central Florida, and then you go get smacked by Bama, the same thing is still true. You're not on their level. At the end of the day, until you beat those teams, you're not going to be there. And I've kind of felt like, I would have, let's just say last year Notre Dame beats Oklahoma State. I would have much rather ended the season right there than have to then say that's now my prize for beating Oklahoma State is I got to go play Bama and we're going to get beat by 30 again, right? So that's why I still like the idea of ending your season with a win. If we're talking about momentum and confidence and those type of things, I still look back to the Music City Bowl in 2014 and the momentum that Notre Dame had going the offseason after a 7-5 year because they won. I just think there's still merit to that. And it's partly why I've been adamant about the 4-team playoff. But if you're going to expand, I'd rather go to 12 than 8, just my opinion. 8 I don't like, because I think 8 still has us in the same boat we're in now, because there's going to be 6 guarantees. That's what will happen at 8. There's going to be 6 guarantees, which means somebody's getting left out. Because we all know there's going to be Power 5 teams that aren't in the top 8 rankings wise, right? I mean, that's just the reality of it. So I don't love 8. I'd rather go to 12. Or what I still think they should do is go back to the old bowl system, and you could change up some of the matchups, make maybe the Sugar Bowls different or whatever, but go back to the old bowl system, which then expands the number of teams that can get in. I mean, look what Notre Dame in 1973 when they beat Texas, right? They go into the Cotton Bowl, they're ranked 5th. They beat Texas, they jump up to 1. They win a national championship, right? So in today's system, yep, Notre Dame doesn't win a title that year, even though they went, beat the number 1 team and beat them, 38-10, something like that, right?
Hey, we are all singing from the same hymn book here. I think all 3 of us, if you give us a 1985 bowl system with a +1 after the bowls, that's the gold standard. That's what we'd want.
I would love that, because I think it brings back the bowls too, right? Like that's the thing.
Sure.
We've lost. Bowls don't mean anything anymore.
Well,
right?
and here's the thing. Here's the central point about all of this. And like 1977 with Notre Dame, that and 1978 New Year's Day with Arkansas beating Oklahoma and all the different pieces of the puzzle that night. Also 1983, with Auburn and Miami and Texas and Georgia and Illinois also in the mix. You have 6 or 7 teams involved in New Year's Day. 6 or 7 teams have a chance. Right now you have 4 in the playoff. Right. But with if you get a 1983, 1977 scenario, you have 2 or 3 more fan bases going into New Year's Day knowing we have a shot. So that is empirically better for the sport. You're going to get the higher ratings, higher interest for more games. It should be so obvious.
And I may be the ninth ranked team, and I know that there's not enough opportunities, but you know what? I can knock so-and-so out, right? Yes. I just think and then what else also happens? So let's say the Rose Bowl is played on the first, and then there's half the games on the first, half the games are on the second. USC's ranked 6th. They beat Ohio State, who's 3rd, or vice versa. You know what those fan bases, the fan base of the team that won, is doing? They're watching every other bowl game that's going to happen from there on to find out who gets beat to knock my team up, right? Isn't that what we see in the NCAA tournament? Like, hey, we won our game, so let's go watch the Duke-Kentucky game to see who we're going to play. I think that would be so good from a financial standpoint. Yes. I think it would restore the tradition of the bowls. I think it would also give a lot more teams the ability to have an impact on the postseason without saying, because there's never 8 teams with a legitimate chance to win a championship. Never. And not just now. Go back to 1980. Is there more than 3? I mean, look, 1988, there was really only 2 teams that had a shot at winning a title that year. It was Notre Dame and Miami, maybe Florida State, but they lost to Miami, right? Maybe Michigan, they were really good that year, but they lost to Notre Dame. West Virginia gets to play Notre Dame for championship. That team was not in the same league as Notre Dame and Miami or Michigan or even Florida State. It's been the same way for years. There's never been 8 teams with a legitimate shot to win a title unless it was a year where there just weren't any great teams. It's always 4 to 5. But now you don't have to necessarily win 3 games to impact it. Now you can just win 1. And, we didn't jump into the playoff, but we ended our season and we shook some stuff up. I think that'd be so good for college football. And you go back to Mark. I'll speak to your heart. I miss the days when the winner of Ohio State and Michigan were actually playing for something beyond just a playoff, where I've seen years where Ohio State beat Michigan and they knew they weren't getting the playoff. And I'd listen to Ohio State fans who were like, yeah, but we're not going to get in the playoff. I hate that, right? Like the 18 team. I would like to have seen that 18 Ohio State team get into the postseason and then see what they do in the Rose Bowl. And then maybe then they can spring into the top 4. I miss the days where Charles Woodson and Michigan upset Ohio State and they've got a rose in their mouth, or, your goal is back to winning the Sugar Bowl or winning the Fiesta or winning the Rose. Then you let the chips fall where they may. That's so much better than the sport, and for the sport, in my opinion. And you still get your 4. Mm-hmm. And now all the people say, well, Notre Dame didn't belong. Well, now you'll know, because they would have got beat in the Big Bowl, or Notre Dame would have won a game. And now you're like, okay, yeah, they belong, and vice versa. Pac-12 doesn't belong in this conversation. Well, they're going to get their chance to show it or not.
You get your 4 after New Year's Day?
Yes, that's what I would do.
You get your +1.
I'd go 4.
+1?
I'd go 4.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's because the 12-team playoff is gonna make you play that many extra games, right?
Yes.
So that's absolutely what I would do. And I think the other thing about playing 16 games, for me, it's a little different than the NFL. I think 17 is a little too much, but to play this, you're going to play into January, whatever. So what? Most of these kids aren't even in school in most of January anyway. But you also get a month off. So there is a time to recover that you don't get in the NFL, where you kind of just jump right into the postseason. So I don't think it's quite the toll that maybe we make it out to be. I mean, at the Division III level, you play 10 games and then you go right to the playoff and you got to play 15 straight games in the Division III level. Well, at Division I, you'd have to play 16, but you get a month off. And so I think it's something that could be handled, and I think it'd be great for the sport and regular season, because I think what's happening is I still believe I don't want college football to turn into college basketball, where the regular season is just nobody cares. Other than your team, nobody cares. I still love the fact that a game in October in West Lafayette can have national championship impact. like we saw in 18, or, and just, we could go down the long list of games that have impacted the sport and say, this matters. And, that's what I would like to see. So, yes, and I do know I'm long-winded. I've always been long-winded. It is what it is. That's just who I am. I'm sorry.
It's phenomenal. And some people criticize me that don't watch me on a regular basis because I bring on my guests. And when they're as good as Matt and Brian, I let them go. I'm on here like 50 hours a week talking and taking phone calls for 3 hours. I can talk all I want the rest of the time. That's why I have these guys on. I'll listen. Shoot, I got 3-hour call-in shows. You guys can hear me all you want because I've diced all this up. Now that you know what you're making me do here, Brian, and Matt's done it in the past with the +1 is go back, dice through all these seasons and figure out, okay, what was this going to look like then? Mm-hmm. The only issue I would have is I would want an airtight way of selecting the teams that play opposite the conference champions in those major bowl games. We can't go back to 1980 where it's just a money grab and you want the best. You want an 8-3 Notre Dame team and you're going to elevate them into the Sugar Bowl just because you want fans in the stands and you want TV ratings. So that would have to be airtight because we're looking at how many major bowl games. What do we continue that? Do we consider the entire New Year's 6 to be major bowl games, and therefore we need 12 quality teams? And to your earlier point, that doesn't mean all 12 are going to have a chance to advance to the Final Four, but most of them should have a opportunity or shot at it.
Matt, do you thought of a proposal? Because I have two. What are your thoughts on that? On how that should go?
Well, the main thing is, being able to get to quality wins and, the teams that you've played and whether you're a conference champion or not. Like, I think that, this setup would be geared toward giving like a Boise State under Chris Peterson a seat at the table. Or like when you have a situation where Boise State and TCU both go unbeaten, that they both get in over like a 2-lot, a 10. We see it every year. There's a 10-2 Power 5 team that, it's 2 losses were in its biggest games of the year. So it doesn't really have that shiny win on its resume, but it got all those bites at the apple. I think that, being able to make sure that an unbeaten group of 5 team regularly gets a seat at the table, I think, that's a particular point of interest because 12-0 in a college football season, right up there with hitting a baseball as one of the toughest things to do in sports, like that needs to be recognized. And we see far too often the unbeaten group of 5 team not get the same respect of a 10-2 Power 5 team when it comes to bowl selection, in these at-large areas. So being able to arrive at some kind of standards along those lines.
For me, Mark, I want to go back to winning your conference, get you into this bowl every year.
Yes.
The caveats that I would have is, number one, if a group of 5 team finishes ranked in the top 10, they get an automatic bid. If they're outside the top 10, then they don't, which would put like that 06 Boise team that beat Oklahoma, that would put them in because they were ranked, I think, like 9th. I also think if you're not ranked in the top 12 as a Power 5 champion, you don't qualify. I think we've got to avoid the Yukons getting into the Orange Bowl or the, you know what I mean? Like, I think there needs to be some sort of, and it could be top 15. We need to avoid having some year where the ACC sucks or the Pac-12 sucks or the Big Ten sucks.
And I
they're
think right
taking
there,
up a spot.
And I think you do that by saying if you lose at least 3 games, you lose first in line status. Because I realize you can play a really tough schedule and lose 3 games, but you're losing 3 games. That's 25% of your schedule. You can't lose 3 if you want any kind of preferred status. We can't, and that's the problem with the automatic bids for conference champions in a playoff, right? Yeah. If you have an 8-4 conference champion, a 5-loss conference champion, that immediately dilutes the regular season. So you just need to have a few guardrails in terms of number of losses you can allow.
Can I push back on that just a little bit?
Sure.
And I'm going to use USC as an example. USC goes 9-3 in 2016. By the end of the year, they were one of the 5 best teams in college football. I think because college football is such a long season, you shouldn't just dismiss the first month of the season. I hate when people do that. But I think you should be able to look at a team and say, hey, look, here's what happened. They started this kid in the opener. Then they eventually made a quarterback change, and that led to them doing this. I also think that what you would see is if you put a 3-loss thing, you know what USC would also never do? Play Alabama in the opener again. And I think if you're going to put like that 3-loss thing on it, then all of a sudden you're going to see teams react by saying, well, then we're not playing anybody in the non-conference. Why would we risk losing a game in the non-conference if I'm an SEC team when it's going to be hard enough for me to not have 2 losses in there? So I get what you're saying. And then the flip side is, to example is Notre Dame last year. Notre Dame goes 11-1. Do you know how many teams they beat that finished year ranked in the top 25? 0, right? So who was a better team? Notre Dame's 5th-ranked 2021 team that beat 0 ranked teams, or USC's 9-3 team? Which of those 2 teams had a had a better opportunity to get in the postseason and do damage?
So that you answered the question.
Right.
Notre Dame deserved the chance, but USC probably would have been better.
Right. And so to me, I feel like you don't want to create an environment that encourages teams to soften their schedules. And I feel like something like that would, where you because what if a team kind of goes through the first month of the season and you got a kid that's hurt, I mean, take Trevor Lawrence in 2018, right? Like the Clemson team we saw the first 3-4 games was a whole lot different than the Clemson team we saw in November. Clemson might be a bad example because their schedule is so soft because of how bad the ACC was, but pick Joe Burrow. Let's say Joe Burrow's injured the first month of the LSU season in 19 and they lose to Texas and they lose to, like Auburn. But, man, by the end of the year, nobody's beating LSU. So I think football is because they do play so few games. I get what you're coming from, but you can't lose 25% of your games and get in the postseason. I understand that in theory, but I feel like if you make it more of where you're ranked as opposed to your win-loss, it then creates more opportunities to say, hey, we're going to give that team that had that unique early season opportunity or that 2-game stretch where they were missing their Heisman Trophy candidate to say they're still one of the assuming you win your conference or that kind of thing. My whole thing was more about protecting us against a conference champion that just stinks.
Sure.
That would be my concern.
I was completely on board about 5 minutes ago, but your last couple points left me by the wayside concerning I have no trust in the AP votes, and I have little trust in the College Football Playoff Selection Committee, but I'm taking the human element out of the entire equation, and we don't have time to discuss it right now, but that's what I'm doing, is taking and I've laid out my plan. No human element in my plan.
Every computer model is created by a human.
True.
2014, though, the first year of the playoff showed that the human element just can't get firm criteria, and it just eroded trust in the playoff system.
Well, but see, here's I get that, and I didn't agree with that decision either, but the team they put in won it, right? And I kind of feel like there's no perfect system. I hate the computer models because computer models gave us years where Florida State gets beat by Miami but still gets to go play the championship, or they gave us a year where Oklahoma gets curb stomped by Colorado in the Big 12 title game but still gets to go play LSU for a championship, right? Like, that was a far from perfect system as well. I mean,
absolutely. I hate that system.
I think honestly,
I'm going neither way.
Honestly, I still feel like because if you go to this model, because the bowl games allow us to see so much more on the field of this conference versus that conference, I feel honestly like the playoff committee's has been pretty good. I think the first year, the thing that killed me the first year, it wasn't so much jumping Ohio State. It was more, why would you then put them behind Baylor? Who you're like, well, Baylor beat them. But yeah, but they did that a long time ago. And you continue to put TCU ahead of Baylor, even though but I think they kind of rectified it. And over the years, I think they've done a better job of, I've kind of disagreed with some seedings at times, but I felt like they've gotten the 4 teams right.
My issue with the committee has never been the decisions they've made in regards to the selection of the teams. It's more about the system itself. Mm-hmm. Almost always, excluding 2019, I can make a case for 1 or 2 teams that were left out that have just as good a resume as a team that was included.
Sure. I think 18 especially. 18 especially. I mean, sure. You had Georgia that year, you had Ohio State that year. But see, here's the thing, though, Mark. In this system, Ohio State in 2018 gets a chance to go prove it on the field.
Sure,
they would have had a chance to possibly play a Notre Dame or a team like that, right? I think that's the reason I'm even more okay with the playoff committee after a bowl stretch. Because if you didn't think Notre Dame deserve to be in 2020 after they got curb stomped by Clemson. Okay, you're going to get your chance to find out, because now they got to go play, Clemson or not Clemson. They got to go play Oklahoma or whoever else in a bowl game first. They got to go prove themselves there first. And I think that would, to your point, Mark, I think that would help us to solidify even more, like, okay, this team didn't belong. Why do you say that? Because they went and lost by 30 in a bowl game. Now we know they're out, and that other team that deserved a shot to go back in. I just hate the idea of the computer rankings. They gave us so many bad results. And like for example, there's the S&P Plus, right? After the 2019 season is complete, the S&P Plus still has LSU ranked behind Ohio State and Clemson. Like, I'm sorry. No, right? Like, Wisconsin was a top 15 team like all year last year. It's a projection. It's projecting them to keep doing the same thing every week that they've been doing. And I know it's not the same because it's a projection, not a ranking or whatever. But the point is, if a human comes up with crap criteria, then you're going to get a crap ranking. And we saw that with the BCS.
Absolutely. And we don't have time here for me to explain, but certainly I've built 2 different 16-team models and 2 different 18 models. What you guys are causing me to do is want to stay up all night and go through every year and go through the 4-team or the plus one.
I've done that.
I want to do that.
I have done that. I have gone through. You should do a show on this, Mark, and I'd love to, because it'd be fun. Because like I've heard Miami fans say, well, if there was a playoff, you wouldn't have won a title in 88. And I said, yeah, true. Miami would have won the rematch. But you know what? Notre Dame would have won the rematch in 89. So, you'd still have a title. So I would love to see that. That'd be such a fun discussion. Absolutely. I'd love to do that.
Okay. And my last point in all this is I want a definitive ruling on the group of 5. My system would have you either leave them out or you include them, not this wishy-washy. It depends how they finish. And I would back that up and have backed that up in regards to, I want them to know we are included or we are not included. That's what I want.
I would not include them.